Hello and welcome to the PowerFish podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Fish. Today we're going to talk about death and grief and all the sad things in the world.
Death, grief, sadness, hell.
Reason being, I have had some loss in the family, and I'm going to go over that here in a little bit. There's a bit of a story that goes along with it. But before we get to that, as we are going to be talking about some heavy subjects, how about a not so heavy story from my past week?
To start it off.
Let's kick it off with just some funny poke fun at a person who did a silly. How about that? So
we never poke fun at people.
No, we're
good people.
We could have been the new popes. Anyway, so that is topical news now. So I partake the local Mickey D's, McDonald's as they call it. They call it Maccers in Australia.
No way.
They call it Maccers.
You know what that reminds me of is how Hardee's and Carl's Jr. are the same thing?
Yeah.
It's like that. But Hardee's and Carl's Jr. are both at least United States. Maccers?
Maccers. They call it Maccers. And
That's crazy.
And I kind of like it. I kind of like that.
Maccers. Mickey D. We got Mickey D's. What else? We got Don Don's.
Don Don's.
I think those are pretty much the big ones. But Maccers?
And Maccers.
I'm going to start saying that. That's good.
Go
Aussies.
on down to get you some Maccers. So I pull into the Maccers. I'm getting a DDP or what it was, or a DP or one of the. Or no, it wouldn't have been a DP.
It would have been a DC.
It would have been a DC or a DP. Soda. I'm getting soda. Okay. And I order ahead on the app. You see, so I order ahead on the app, and I've paid, and I pull up to this drive-through. I wait in the line. I pull up in the drive-through, and a woman comes on the speaker. And she says, "How can I help you?" And then I said, "Hey, I got a drive-through code. Here's my code." And she says, "We don't have that drink." And I say, "Okay. How about another just diet soda? I drink diet soda. How about another diet soda? We don't have drinks."
What?
They said, "We don't have drinks." And I said,
"At the Maccers?
At the Maccers, they don't have the drinks." So then I say, "Well, okay, I already paid on the app. Is there a way I can get a refund?" And I'm going to tell you the sentence as she said it to me. And you're going to be visibly confused as well, as was I. So I say, "I already paid. How can I get a refund?" And she says, "You can cancel on the app, or you're more than welcome to come inside and get it yourself."
So how I would interpret that after a few seconds of thinking about it, I would think that you can cancel on the app to get your original price refunded to your original payment method, or you can come inside and just receive cash as refund.
Yeah, you'd think that.
That's
right?
what I would think.
You'd think that. So I pull away from the drive-through, confused, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what this gal meant, but I'm gonna get to the bottom of it.
You got to. If you go inside, you're either getting money or drink.
Yeah, okay.
One or the other.
So she says to me, "You're more than welcome to come in and get it itself." I whip around the Maccers. I park I park in the stall and I walk inside, and behold, a functional soda machine.
Working? You're sure it was
fully
working?
functional. I know it's working because I got it myself. Because I was more than welcome to get it myself.
So that's what she meant.
That's
Come
what
in
she
and
meant.
Get the drink yourself.
So yeah, what this gal meant was, here's my extrapolation. Here's my takeaway, if you will. The drive-through lane soda machine was broken. And what this gal meant was,
behind the counter.
You're more than welcome to park your vehicle, get out of the vehicle, walk inside, and pour your own drink, instead of the gal at the drive-thru walking 10 feet.
Walking around getting it.
Walking 10 feet and filling it up.
Wow. That's wild. She didn't just... Dude, Maccers, man. That's... I get these people are getting paid the lowest they can be, but that's just... You got to have some human decency. He's back.
There's a cat. Special guest.
Oh, God
Let's get him on the pod.
Oh. Yeah. We got a pussy out. What are you doing? Yeah. Wow. Well, that's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I, if we've never worked fast food service or food service at all, except you worked at a Panera Bread.
I worked at a Panera Bread for a month.
Or what's the other name for it? Bread company? St. Louis Bread Company.
St. Louis Bread Company.
Yeah.
Founded in St. Louis, from what I gather.
Okay. The cat's gotta go. The meowing is unrelenting. It's like a dinosaur yelling. Ugh. And we're back.
All
right,
back.
so, as I was saying, you worked at a St. Louis Bread. Which one's more bigger? Panera Bread or St. Louis Bread Company?
Panera would be, because St. Louis Bread Company is only in St. Louis.
Strictly St. Louis.
Yeah.
Okay, so Panera Bread.
Well, that was the original name, you see. So instead of rebranding St. Louis Bread Company in St. Louis to Panera Bread, they just kept it St. Louis Bread Company in St. Louis. Yeah.
Because they made the mistake of naming their company off of where it was located.
Yeah.
You gotta have further. When you're making a company, you gotta expect it to be national.
Yeah, exactly. To start, even.
To start off. Anyway, yeah. So you worked at a Panera Bread. Would you have? Let's say you're in this scenario. Someone there's no drive-through where ours. There might be at some. But
there is.
There is.
Yeah.
There is. Yeah, you're right.
There's a drive-through. There used to not be. We used to have in a strip mall kind of guy.
Yeah, it's been. It just shows you how many times I've been there. Not very many. But you're in this scenario right now, and person pulls up, and the behind-the-counter drink machines are disabled. And what is your response? Do you even let the customer know that anything is different?
No, you just they say you want a drink, and I'll be like, all right, bet. I'm not gonna say it's down. I gotta walk. Like, I'm not even gonna say, you know what, I'm gonna go get it from our far away one just because I appreciate your business. Like, it's not. I'm not.
So yeah, the customer. I think that's the right thing to do. The customer would not even know that anything's different.
Yeah, you
should not.
Now,
that's crazy.
It's easy to say, "Oh, service workers should do more," but it's also really easy to say, "I paid for a drink. Just walk
a few extra feet." Crime and Netley, we don't have. It's interesting, not only because she didn't do it, but because she was so ambiguous in her speech as to what actually the problem was.
Yeah, there was no direction. It wasn't. She said, "We don't have drinks, but you can come and get it yourself."
Yeah,
that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't compute.
I don't know. What do you think that we took IQ tests and we were pretty smack on average? Do you think that's an IQ thing? Like, why? Because that's common.
Does laziness affect IQ?
No. The speech, the
non-direct.
Yeah, like that seems so easy to explain. Let's just complain about a fast food worker for the entire episode here, because we're so privileged. It seems so easy to be clear to me, I guess.
I've never really struggled with clearness. Now, my family will say that I'm vague, but it's just because it's family and I don't divulge my entire life story with my family.
Sure.
But in like a more, I don't know, informed conversation, it's more easy for me, I think, to communicate effectively and lay out my purpose with my speech.
Sure. So I guess what I was getting at is, do you think IQ has anything to do with your ability to construct a sentence that is coherent to the people listening to it?
I would say so.
You think so?
I think there's something to do with vocabulary is one thing. That's one thing to consider. There's I've referenced Louis C.K. several times on this podcast. Funny guy. He likes to do weird things with women in hotel rooms, apparently. But anyway, so other than that, it happened.
Oh, was that okay?
Did you ever? Oh, side note.
I never knew this went past anything other than alleged.
Side note about Louis C.K. So he had his first stand-up special, back to comedy. like the whole, like everybody went. Everybody wanted to go see Louis C.K. on his first special back. And
course.
he does a couple bits and then he stops and he's just like, do you want to talk about it? Like, let's talk about it. He literally addresses it on
Really?
stage during the special.
That's
And basically what he said was, I want to give you advice. And I'm the only person that can give you this advice. And he's just like, if you want to do something with somebody, just ask them and then continue to ask them many, many times and then don't do it. That's what he said. And he talked about like, everybody in the world knows my thing. That's my thing. That's what I like to do. And everybody knows it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, way to address it, I guess.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better way that you could sort of ease the tension of something like that.
It's better than not talking about it at all.
Oh yeah, because then people make up their own assumptions about scenarios that are usually leaning towards the worst possible.
Because I think with that situation was he asked her and she said yes, and then they went back and then he did the stuff, and then she decided at some point in the process, whether it was during or after, that she didn't like it. And now one could make the argument that that's on her. I'm not going to make that argument because I don't want to be canceled. That's
a tangled place to be in.
It's a tangled place to be in because it's not a one size fits all for that kind of situation.
Right.
There are certain situations where you could say like, hey, you have every opportunity to say no at any point in time. But also then there are people that are too forceful. And you get a guy like Louis C.K. who's rich and famous. Right. That kind of tangles the web here.
It's really muddied water.
Yeah.
We could talk a whole episode about something complicated like that, but that's not what this is about.
What was I was bringing up Louis C.K. what were we talking about just before that?
Well, that was the side tangent of Louis C.K.
Louis C.K. was already a side tangent.
So that was a side. So the original side tangent
I remember
up Louis C.K. in the first place.
So we were talking about speech and intellect. And he has a whole bit. It's a great bit about top shelf words. That's what he talks about, and how most people gravitate to just the most readily accessible word for a situation. No, it doesn't matter its context or what that word means. Really, people just well, okay, this one is about how people over exaggerate in their speech. They're not clear in that some, like if you say something is awesome.
Yeah.
That means you are in awe of the thing.
Awesome.
Yeah. Or hilarious. Something is hilarious. That is, according to him anyway. I haven't looked up the definition of this closely, but it's something that is so funny that it like
you feel
shatters your mind in a way. It's insane. It's the top shelf of words, and people gravitate towards that. And I think the reason I brought it up at all was because that conversation reminds me of that conversation of people gravitating towards whatever the top shelf is and not looking deeper for a more nuanced definition, to be more direct,
more precise and accurate in the actual meaning.
Like a writer. Think of somebody who's writing a fiction book, whatever it is. People like that, if they're a good writer, are great at this because you see words that you've never even heard of
all the time.
Yeah, and if
you're reading a book, yeah,
and it's because that communicates the point perfectly.
Because you have to. You're reading. All of your information is coming from word alone.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have visual or any other perception to gather information from other than speech,
right?
And words and text. So that it has to be accurate and precise in something like a book.
Yeah. So that's top shelf words versus something with nuance. How do we get back to what we were talking about?
So people gravitate towards the top shelf word, which I totally agree with. But does that mean, does grabbing the top shelf word sometimes muddy up the meaning of what you're trying to say so much that it becomes hard to understand for those around, for those listening? like in your situation at the Mackers.
Mackers. I mean,
Because was that a situation of grabbing the top shelf, or was that a situation of just poor sentence construction?
I think that's a whole different situation. That's a situation of somebody who just, first of all, was contradictory. We don't have drinks and you can come get it. That is a contradiction in and of itself.
Okay, yeah, that already
we're already not in a good spot. And then also it in that sentence, you can come and get it yourself, was ambiguous.
Right, as to that being refund or product.
Yeah.
Being drink. Interesting. So yeah, maybe that's an IQ thing, maybe it's not.
It speaks, I think, if anything, to intellectual laziness. Maybe.
Intellectual lazy. So you're saying they could have a high IQ, but they're just lazy, or a high speech. I don't. IQ is too broad. A speech intelligence,
or maybe if not intellectually lazy, verbally lazy, or something along those lines. It's people. I think somebody like that could tighten up their speech and be a little bit more clear. I think almost anybody that's an average type person could do that to an extent, but it's somebody who works at Macker's and doesn't care. They make whatever they make,
and perhaps they are right to not care that much.
And you know what? And I came on and being like, "Oh, this bitch is telling me the drink's not in there. I have park and get it myself." I don't care. Like, it's whatever.
We're complaining about a McDonald's experience. Like, the fact that we have a McDonald's to go to complain about is already from a point on high.
Exactly.
But that's not what we're talking about on this podcast today.
No,
we just talked about it for a while.
That ate up a significant amount of time.
That was what'd you start it off with? A icebreaker. That's what it is.
Yeah.
The ice. We're in water. We're in the water under the ice at this point.
Exactly. Okay, the subject of death and the subject of grief. So to start this, I want to recap the week in question that I and my family experienced the most amount of loss. And I don't even know if you know some of the things that went down. Now, you'll see when we get to it. There is one event that is the worst of the events. But I will tell it to you in chronological order. Just what happened. What?
So just to get a rundown.
Just to get a rundown of what happened. And this isn't to, I guess, just talk about it, because it was, to me at least, in a morbid way, interesting that everything happened so close together. So I think it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday, one of the two, and I get a text from my mother, and I'm gonna this is funny. I'm gonna give you the Cliff Notes version of what the message said, because it was all in one message.
Big message.
She said it a little bit more featherly, but a little bit gentler. But this was the contents of the message. Your grandfather has died, and your dog's health is declining and will be put down by the end of the week.
Okay, I'll imagine that in a more cloud-like speech.
It was like, hey, hope you're having a good day at work. Also, Grandpa passed away. Sorry, bud. Your dog's dying, so she'll either be dead or we're gonna put her down this weekend.
That's not funny, but the way it's being presented is funny.
Well, and this is the thing, and we're going to get to this here in a little bit, time depending, but we're going to talk about here a little bit in result of following a tragedy, following grief. It's good to maybe try to be lighthearted. If
listen, like, nobody's going to argue that death is bad, but my personality, it is just simply difficult for me to not, perhaps I would say almost guaranteed, to a fault in some scenarios, try to make light of things, because I find a lot of stuff funny, and sometimes they're related to death. And I'm not laughing when I laugh, because I'm probably going to at multiple points in this
too. Yeah,
it's not at the death and sadness and grief. It is generally at things surrounding like like what just happened, the presentation of this in a text, and the absurdity of these two things in so close proximity, these two tragedies, the absurdity is simply funny. So
no, it is, and that's what to talk about my grief process. That's what I latch onto is the funny aspect of not even funny. It's just the oddity of things happening so close together.
Yeah.
Which we're not even done yet. So
just getting started.
So that was on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. She says that to me, and I just leave work. I'm just like, deuces. Because I'm told, because okay. She says that to me on a Tuesday. This is what happened. She said that to me on a Tuesday. I stayed at work because I was going to go on Thursday on my day off and visit my dog before she passes. My grandpa, he had already passed. There's nothing I can do. He was in the Philippines. So there's nothing I can do about that.
Oh, yeah.
He was.
You could take a walk over there?
Yeah. What am I going to just get in the car and drive? I don't know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I stay where I am on Tuesday. Wednesday, I get a follow-up message from my mother, and it just basically says, the declining health has declined further, is essentially what it says. And she might not make it the day. So I'm like, okay, so I leave work, go and visit my dog. And she was in a state, and she was clearly, so had been struggling with, what we would refer to as doggy dementia for a long time. She was just very not in it, I should say.
How does that play out? How do you know that, I guess? How
because she would just kind of wake up and, well, it didn't help that she's blind. She was blind and deaf, but she would just be very confused, like visibly confused.
In addition to being blind.
She just like wouldn't understand anything about like her surroundings, even though she could feel around the room and had previously seen around the room to know where she was, but she would just wake up and just be confused, like she's somewhere else entirely.
Okay, so like she doesn't know where she woke up.
So I don't know if she actually has some form of dementia. I'm just saying. I assume
there was clearly some decline.
There was cognitive decline, definitely, but she was holding on. So that was Wednesday, and she was in a bad spot. She actually ended up holding on until Friday. She passed on Friday.
So she got a couple more days in.
She had a couple more days in her. She passed Friday morning. I got a follow-up text. Hey, she passed in her sleep. And I was like, it needed to happen. It was one of those situations. And we'll talk about that too, is what was the phrase I used? The justification of death. It's difficult in the grieving process to say this kind of maybe needed to happen.
Oh, you know, absolutely.
Yeah. But that is sometimes the best thing to latch onto. That this is what was good for her.
Yeah.
And honestly,
is it worth them being alive in a state that's I mean, who knows really for the dog, but perhaps unlivable mentally.
And in some aspects, my grandfather was in a similar situation. He did have dementia. He was very, very much in a decline over the last several years. So in some way, that's also kind of extends over to, he was at least in his 80s and had cognitive decline. So it was just like, okay, that's no more pain, no more suffering. Yeah, and that's fine. So the dog passed on Friday, and we go to the visitation for the grandfather on Saturday, which was fine. Again, old guy, lived a long life, had a lot of friends. So I mean, there was a lot of people there, but nobody was really sad. His daughter was sad. My stepmother was pretty upset, but really everybody else was just like, he's an old dude. You know, what are you going to do? This sucks, but...
At a point, that was kind of... I've had some close people that have kind of been like everyone's been spending the last year and a half preparing. So it's not quite so like there's no just sudden shock.
Yeah.
Of So I kind of understand that.
So that was Saturday. Went over pretty okay. We left that, and we went back, and it was sad. It was a little gloomy. My dog passed. My grandfather passed, but it was life goes on. And I even said that to some people. They were, how are you holding up? It's like, life goes on. It's all right. It is what it is. So that was Saturday. So, and we're not done yet. So, and like I said, I'll give you a little teaser for the upcoming death in the family. This is the worst one. So that was Saturday, and Sunday, Monday, Tuesday go off pretty okay. We're, everybody's just kind of recovering from the grief, and everybody's settling back into the new normal. Everything's fine. Wednesday morning comes around, and I'll tell this from my perspective. So as I learn events. So I go to work at my normal time. I start work at 9:30, and it is now maybe 1:30. And I get a phone call from my mother, and I actually answer the phone call, and I say, hello, hi. And I don't hear anything. I hear nothing. And then it hangs up, and then I call back, and my mother's done this before. Well, she'll pocket dial me. Or butt dial, or whatever you call that. Mm-hmm. So I call her right back, and I say, hey, did you pocket dial me? Like, what's up? Sobbing. Just sobbing. And she says, what does she say? So already my mother's crying. That doesn't happen. My mother's a very not emotional. She's very composed, not emotional, very logical thinker. And already my mother's crying. So I'm already like, I got to find a place to sit down, because whatever she's about to say is the worst thing that's ever freaking happened.
Yeah.
So she basically says this to me. There was an accident on the interstate this morning, and your brother was in it, and he didn't make it, is what she says. That's not something you're prepared to hear.
No.
So going from that, so she says this to me. I don't know what to say. And little backstory, my mother loved this guy. So he was my stepbrother that passed. And my mother loved him just as a son, right? But it wasn't her biological son. She's married to his dad.
Right.
So my stepdad. So I say this to her. I don't know what to say. And I'm just like, is there anything I can do? What do I say in this situation? I don't do I need to go to a place and do a thing? I
was trying to imagine myself in that same scenario, and I'm genuinely like, what do I do?
Yeah. That's all I could do is just ask if there's something I can do, because I can't, there's no word to fix this. There's nothing you can say.
Right.
And I just need to know how I can be helpful. And then she says, I know, honey, I don't know what we're going to do. And that's why I brought that up, is because as much as she's grieving at that moment, she knows she's not with his dad at this point. They're both separately at work. She says, she had talked to him, but she says, I know. And the reason I brought all that up about her not being blood related is because as much as she and I are grieving, we know that he is grieving harder.
Yeah.
It's just, you just have to be. You just have to be. So she's just like, yeah, I know. I don't, what do you do? So and which is funny. So I say to her, well, maybe I'll come by after work and come over to the house. Just
trying to say stuff.
Cause at that point, I thought about it after the fact, like in the days following. I think I was just in shock. I guess I figured, I'll just return to work. No, figured out about 3 seconds after the phone call. I was just like, oh no, I'm leaving. That's not, this is not that situation. So I leave the house. So that is the week of, that all happened within a 1 week period.
Which is insane.
That
is insane.
The reason I want to talk about this is not because I want everybody listening to this to feel sad for me. Because in a lot of ways, it's not that we've moved on. Nobody's moved on. But it's helpful to talk about it. And I think there's probably a lot of people who have experienced a similar situation. And it's nice I would imagine, it's nice to be able to hear from somebody who has experienced it. That's my feeling on it.
Well, it's the same. I mean, no one likes to feel isolated in grief,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, yeah, even if they don't know another person, just knowing that somebody else is or has experienced the same thing is even, I mean, it's not going to make everything better, but it certainly helps.
And the other thing,
most, anyway.
and the other thing is through the grieving process, and we're going to talk about the grieving process here in a little bit. It's really easy, I think, to start to think thoughts that are not true or helpful, and even detrimental. And I'll give an example. Well, I'll give an example now. Actually, I had a little bit of stuff planned for later, but I'll talk about it now. So, and this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about who my brother was. And it's going to sound like I'm saying mean things, but I'm really not. He was a great guy. You knew him.
Yeah, I've known him for many, many, many years.
And
yeah.
I think and the reason I've accepted the fact that I can talk about this openly and honestly is because kind of that's what the whole family's done. The whole family's been like, oh, he had his quirks, and we can talk about that and not be in a mean way. So my brother was very much on the spectrum. I don't know exactly how he had interacted with him, as far as like a what a diagnosis would have been, but he was very, very bad about social cues. He didn't know how to read a room. Would talk endlessly, honestly, about whatever topic he wanted to talk about. And kinda, one of those people that would.
That's true for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure you had your experience with that, and it was because he really wanted to have a conversation with people. But to the person, I'll use terminology, the neurotypical of us, which is you and I for the most part, I believe.
Probably, maybe.
To a neurotypical person, for the most part, you're gonna feel boxed in. You're gonna feel cornered. So, I and a lot of people who knew him knew how good of a heart he had, but would steer away from those conversations because it is uncomfortable or it is too much. And I and everybody who I just mentioned, which is most people that know him, following his passing, really felt bad about those things.
Yeah.
It was really difficult for everybody to get over the fact that there were times where we ignored him.
Yeah, right.
And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the thoughts that creep into your mind. Because if he never passed, this would not be a thought. It would just be, you got to set boundaries with some people, right? But it's difficult. It's difficult whenever now they're gone and you can no longer have those conversations. So it's helpful to talk about these things because you can get an outsider's opinion. You can get somebody who can look at the situation logically and help you determine if this is a valid self-criticism, which has been the experience lately. And I think everybody's moving past that. I think it was really tough day 1 and 2.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say, I imagine as in I'd heard you just say it. Including from myself, when you told me that he died, I didn't interact with him on a daily basis, but like I said, I had known him from several jobs because I had worked with him at the grocery store a number of years ago, and then I worked with him for over a year at the trucking job that he was at.
Mm-hmm.
So I have had plenty of discourse with him, many of which resulted in what you just described. Like, it is 15 minutes into this one topic, and I'm still on the phone with him. And when you told me he died, my mind immediately went back to those things. I thought about the emotions that I felt in the moment of him talking to me, and I regretted it. I regretted feeling the way I felt about him talking to me for 15 minutes.
It's so easy to immediately go to that.
Yeah, exactly. And it is tough to, I will say, this happened around the time I started meditating, and meditating actually, I think, helped. Obviously, it's not, in my mind, nearly as much as you or anybody else in your family, but for me, realizing when those thoughts were being brought up, being able to catch the emotion that those thoughts come packaged with and assess it in real time and sort of judge it in a way. And is this justified? Is this a reasonable emotion to feel, like regret and stuff? And meditating really helped sort of get out of it quicker than sooner than later. And like I said, it wasn't nearly as much of a hit for me as it was for you and your family.
Oh,
but
goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. So meditating helped for sure.
Well, I mean, we talked about that when we talked about meditating. We talked about the benefits of meditating on mental health.
Right. Yeah.
And I imagine, I'm not a person inclined to depression, but I would imagine that a feeling of regret or a feeling of dread is similar to what myself and my family felt. It's probably on the regular for somebody who is depressive.
Right.
Which puts into perspective how potentially, there's chemicals involved, but potentially meditating could alleviate some of that pressure.
I think absolutely. Yeah,
I would
totally.
I wouldn't want to say it would be a fix or a cure, and maybe you still would need medical intervention, but to at least start in that process, I think I couldn't imagine it would do any harm.
Oh yeah, mindfulness there's really nothing bad and only good things that can come from, no matter your mental state, that can come from mindfulness.
So I mentioned when I was told about his passing, well, I guess I mentioned that it was shocking. An interesting feeling arose also. It was a feeling of panic, which is odd because logically you can look at the situation and realize there's nothing to be done.
Right.
In the moment. But a feeling of immense panic came over me because maybe that's why, because there's nothing that can be done. And I really don't know why. It was a very sudden rush of uneasiness.
This is right after the news?
This is during the news.
Okay.
And directly after.
It's like a panic of needing to feel like you need to do something.
Yeah, it was
like there's something that needs to be done pronto.
Yeah, and it was a very panicked and uneasy feeling that happened directly after. Now this goes away for me pretty soon. I leave work, I go to the house, and some of the family is there. The parents are not there. My mother and his dad are not there yet. They're still driving back from work. Alone, mind you. I couldn't imagine that. They had to drive like hour and a half back from work in the car.
Bro, how would you stop the just Armageddon of thoughts?
Dude,
in
I
that
don't
scenario?
know.
How
I have no
I don't
idea
know how to. Yeah,
it was bad enough driving just across town. You know, especially considering the accident being a motor accident. Jesus. So a feeling of panic rushes over me, and I imagine that's probably common. I can only imagine.
See, I was thinking about that. I was thinking of emotions that I've felt in scenarios of I was gonna say scenarios of trauma, but I don't think that's quite the right word. But just desperate scenarios where usually when you feel the flood of emotion that comes with some news like that, there is something that immediately needs to be done.
Mm.
But for example, if you got like a notice that your house was going to be foreclosed or
Yeah.
you're going to get evicted or just some sort of rush of emotion news, generally speaking, I think the next actions to take need to be done with some haste.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps we've just been trained in that sort of emotional train,
Mm.
and the panic comes, but this time there's just nothing to be done about it. That's my guess as
Yeah.
to why something like panic would come around there, because I definitely feel, I think I would feel the same thing coming to, you know, I've I haven't had a death in anyone really close recently, but I imagine if I would, that panic feeling, probably thinking about it, probably would come with no justified reason.
Yeah. How do you process something that is, I won't say a lot of this has been people saying things that just don't make any sense. A lot of people say, you know, it's impossible to make sense of this, which I don't think is, I could see how they could feel that way. It's not accurate.
Oh, sure.
It's,
Right.
you know, it's a death of anything is something that can be worked through and can be processed with time, but the difficulty of process is there.
Right.
The, you know,
Yeah. Not being able to make sense of it, totally understand, but unfortunately, sometimes it is just quite a simple scenario.
yeah. I mean, so what were we just talking about? We were talking about panic, right?
Yeah, the emotion
So that's in the moment.
that comes with the news.
So with the news, panic, and I'm just right now what I'm doing is I'm kind of recapping a series of emotions. In a little bit, I want to talk about a more structured analysis of grief, but right now I'm going through just kind of what I felt. Panic into more of a numb state, because I come down from the panic, I get back to the house, and some of the family's there. Everybody's obviously just distraught. We're waiting for the rest of the family, namely the parents, to arrive.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at the house that I guess the closest I'm probably ever gonna feel to a disassociation. Which I don't know if you even heard of that as a thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Too much was happening, I guess I'll say, and I needed to emotionally check out.
Right.
That's what happened to me. And you know, people were coming up to me and just sobbing, and they'd come to me and say, "Are you doing okay?" And of course, I'm still grieving, so I'm just like, "Yeah, you know, I'm doing all right. How are you?" And we're gonna go on. But inside, I felt very detached from the trauma.
Yeah,
for a little bit.
I think that's a pretty common thing. See, I don't know if I'm just really weird, but when my last grandparent had died, I was pretty close with him, but even at the funeral, even when I looked in the casket, it was, I just didn't feel.
Mm.
And I guess I'm not really sure why. There never really was a grieving process, even though I did really care and love him, but it just didn't. I don't know. I think that's exactly what I did, a sort of disassociation with your current emotional state.
Mm.
I might have just stayed that way long
Stayed.
enough to where it passed, because there wasn't much feeling that went on.
Do you think? No, I'm not going to assume this, but do you think part of it was how old was your grandparent? First of all, were they old?
70s, I believe.
Do you think? Because I know you. Do you think you might have also logicked your way through it? Kind of a well, not saying it was time for them to pass, like it was with like the dog and my grandparent, but more of a like, well, this makes sense. This is easy to wrap my head around because of their age.
Yeah, there certainly was no confusion about it. It was not a expected death. He wasn't like in the hospital. There was no hospice. There was no. It was a pretty sudden death. I think it was a heart thing.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I guess I sort of just really probably needlessly explained the situation to myself and just accepted it.
Yeah.
Just really quickly.
That's how I have always been with elderly people that pass. It's not that I don't care. It's that.
See, that sorry to cut you off there, but that was a thought going through my head at the time, is because there was just not much feeling happening at all. I thought, like, do I care? Like, like, is there something like I cared about this dude, but, or at least I thought I did. And I sort of gave off that impression a little bit. I mean, I was being myself, I guess. I was being my authentic feeling state, which to those around me appeared as apathetic, which is not a good look.
No, and I dealt with this a lot. So I'll continue. There's more to this. So panic into numbness or a disassociation. That was day one. Day one that happened. Now comes day two. Now, I don't know if you know a lot about grief. First of all, on the subject of grief, there's not a right or a wrong way to grieve. I guess the wrong way to grieve is to just drink yourself to also death.
I was going to say, the wrong way to grieve is to make it worse.
Yeah.
I would say.
So I suppose there might be a wrong way to grieve, but there's really no right way to grieve. And there's no, we can talk all day about, we're going to get to the Kubler-Ross model of grief, a more technical definition or outline, but even the Kubler-Ross tells you that this is not a set in stone path, and grief looks different. And even if you're hitting all the steps, it's out of order sometimes. So grief is not
a science.
It's not a science. It just happens in the way that it happens, really. So in comes day two, and I had never heard, well, I guess I had heard it. I had never really put much thought or definitely experienced a physical manifestation of grief. I can now, as an individual, say that I have experienced a physical manifestation of grief. Day two comes, and I didn't do anything strenuous the day before, other than, just being present with the family.
Mm-hmm.
Day two comes, and my entire body is in pain. Literally head to toe, pain.
That's pretty crazy.
I wasn't prepared for that. I had maybe heard from people or the internet that grief can manifest physically, but I just kind of like, whatever.
Do you think everybody knows that stress certainly can?
It's probably a very similar mechanism.
I imagine
I would imagine.
Yeah.
So head to toe, just pain and an ache. Every joint, every muscle, lots of pain. And other people also experience that in my family, not necessarily at the same time, but very similar time frames. And I talked to somebody about this, and I was just like, I'm just in pain today. And they said, well, that's grief. And it usually happens like day 2 or 3. That's what they said.
Interesting.
I don't know.
I've obviously experienced stress pain, but I never, I don't think directly after a grief
Mhm.
to that degree anyway.
From there, the pain goes away within a day. I mean, for me anyway. Again, not a one size fits all for people. If you were in a grieving process and you feel pain, you might be in it a while, or you might be in it a day. Who knows? For me, it was about a day. I was kind of back on my feet, moving day. I guess it would have been day 3. Going into day 3, there was. I think that's really where the guilt set in for me.
Mm.
That's really where the. Was I good enough to him? I never had an issue with him face to face. I'd go to you and I'd be like, God, he annoys me sometimes. But that was the extent of it. And you know what?
Yeah.
I think he annoyed me not only because of the social cues that we were talking about, but also just because I think I even said this to you at one point. It's difficult to be mad at somebody who annoys you when literally their life mission is to just help people around them. Like that was his whole identity, was just helping his parents, helping his siblings, and just trying to devote his time in a service kind of manner. So it became very, very frustrating for me while he was obviously alive, to be frustrated with somebody who literally just has my best interests in mind.
Right. Yeah. That's quite the dissonance.
Yeah.
To hold.
Yeah. So that happened, but I never, I never really lashed out at him. I never said anything mean to his face. Never really said too much mean behind his back either. He was just a guy that I didn't really wasn't best buds with. But that doesn't stop the grief from coming in and having a feeling in yourself of, I was a bad brother. I didn't give him the attention he deserved, and I wasn't there enough. That was the feeling. And I told my mother this, and it was very difficult for me to talk about this with them because I felt as though it wasn't my place to really. This is another thing grief does for you. For me, anyway. I found it difficult to grieve openly because I felt that other people deserve to grieve openly more.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem with me.
Yeah.
I'm not a public griever at all.
I'm not either.
Well, like I said with my grandparent dying, I'm not much of a griever in general.
But specifically in this situation, what I'm meaning is his dad, as an example, and his biological brother, in a lot of ways, at least in my mind, in my grief riddled mind, it was a feeling of this is their time to grieve, and I don't have a place to grieve. This is their time, which is an odd proposition because I lived with the guy for over a decade. I literally was next door to him in the house, but I still felt that it wasn't my place, which is an odd reaction. I think. I don't know if it's common.
I think the way. Did it feel like there was a spotlight of attention that shouldn't be on you, kind of a thing?
Basically, yeah.
Right, and you felt unjustified in quote unquote stealing attention from who deserves it most.
Yeah,
I can get that.
There was a lot of that because it just felt as though it wasn't fair to be the person grieving the hardest or be the person who needs consoled.
Right. Which is absolutely ridiculous, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's
yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That's the thing that the grief will tell you.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, everybody needs help. It doesn't even matter. I'll take a brief tangent to talk about the funeral. I haven't seen a bigger funeral than that one.
Really?
I have never seen one. So I was in the receiving line. I had to step away for a little bit because it was a lot. It was a lot to be up there. And his parents did great. They stayed up there the whole time. They were really good. Nobody had like emotional outbursts, which would have been understandable. But
Right.
they kept their cool. We had, and I was up there too for a lot of that. We had a line through the pews, wrapped around out the door. That line was out the door for at least an hour straight, and people coming through.
That's crazy.
It was insane. People drove in. We had people drive in from 5-6 hours away.
Holy cow.
We had people.
Damn.
It was ridiculous. So packed house in the funeral home, and then we had a procession. And I actually drove in the procession. And we were towards the front, and behind us, at least 50 cars. At least. Which is insane. I don't know.
I certainly have never been to a funeral at that scale.
That
That's
it
wild.
was ridiculous. There was more people at the this is common for funerals, I think. We had more people at the funeral itself, I don't know what you call it, where the casket is open and they talk. There's usually more people there than there is at the actual burial.
Mm-hmm.
But even at the burial, there was people just surrounding the place. We had, like I said, there was 50 cars. The people that were in the procession went to the funeral or went to the burial because that's why we're in a procession. So yeah, there was just a radial around the actual site, and it was ridiculous. It was
That's wild. Yeah.
It was insane. So that reason I brought that up is because as much as I felt like I wasn't allowed or I shouldn't be allowed to grieve as much as I maybe needed to, all of those people need their time. It doesn't matter if it's somebody that lived 3 hours away and they drove over.
Right.
And grief will tell you that it's not your time to grieve, but it is. It just has to be.
Grief is not zero sum. There's not a limited amount in a bucket that gets poured out.
Yeah.
Right. There's an infinite amount to go around.
Yeah. People generate it. It's
right. Yeah.
You generate it within yourself.
Yeah.
So that's so that was the funeral. It was a huge operation. Actually, I told you this. I'll bring it up. He was a truck driver. You already mentioned that actually.
Right. I worked with him.
They actually ended up bringing his truck to the funeral, his semi, which I thought was crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
They, I think the semi led the procession.
Now that's really cool.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
And then it ended up. This was the coolest part about it, I think. So we get to the burial ground, and or a cemetery as they call it. We get to the cemetery,
as it's called here in the West.
we get to the cemetery, and we got 50 cars pulling into the cemetery, making a left across traffic into the cemetery. And his truck, they have his truck block the traffic, which I thought was really cool. Because they can't get the truck back up in there, so they had it block up the traffic, and nobody could get through until all of us had come in. I thought that was really neat.
Right.
Very, very symbolic, I guess.
Right,
I would
yeah.
say.
Especially because it was his truck.
That's if it was just a semi, that'd be like, oh, it's cool, he was a truck driver, but it was literally his truck.
Right.
And it was very just like, it felt like the truck was giving him a send off.
Yeah.
Which is interesting and very cool in my opinion. So that's my, I'll say that is my process. Now we're still recovering as a family. We're recovering,
which is probably going to be for quite a while.
For specifically, I would say specifically the parents, probably forever.
Oh yeah,
I don't
probably
like
will never go away.
Everybody is. This is my assumption. The closer you were to him, the longer it's going to take to fully recover.
That's with anybody. I
and
think,
for a parent, that recovery might be forever. And it is what it is. Because it also didn't help that he lived with them. He was downstairs every night.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just another layer on the cake here.
Right. Imagine having. I can't imagine being in a house, having a routine, like having him walk like upstairs for breakfast or dinner every, weekend or every night even.
Yeah.
Because
No,
I know he was a truck driver, but he was home. He was home daily.
he was home daily. Yeah. And I
and
can
just
actually,
the routine of it, and that just being broken. So you're thinking about the routine not happening every day. Like that's just crazy.
I can actually speak onto this a little bit because I've had a lot of conversations with my parents about this very topic. And they will say, these are the moments where they break down. It's like their basement's unfinished. And we were down there, we're talking about things. We're probably even going through his stuff and getting everything settled. And they had the thought of like, oh yeah, we're gonna finish the basement this summer. And then they're just like, well, he was gonna help with that. That was, and there's a lot of that. There's been like like my mother said, my mother always makes extra food, and a lot of it was so my brother could take it out on the road for his daily, for his lunch or whatever. And she would make food in the days following his passing, and then she would put it. It's funny. I even think she might have said this with food that was brought to them specifically for his passing, to help the family not have to cook. She set aside food for his lunch.
Yeah.
that is how you get people break down. Because
right.
That
yeah. I couldn't imagine. That just having a routine so built around somebody that's not around anymore just would be, I could not imagine.
So are you familiar with the Kubler-Ross model?
No.
Okay. Have you heard of the 5 stages of grief?
Yes.
That is the Kubler-Ross model.
Okay. I have heard of the Kubler-Ross model, I guess.
Okay. So the 5 stages are as follows: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance.
Okay. Yeah.
Those are your 5 stages.
Yeah. Totally.
Denial that it happened, right? Anger that it happened. Bargaining is more, what if things had happened differently? What could I have done to prevent?
Sort of playing out scenarios.
Yeah. I did a little bit of this with this. I mean, I had the thought in my head. So he passed on the interstate. That's one of 2 ways to get to work. He could have just as easily taken the other route, and had taken the other route before. So there was a part of me that did this, and I thought like, man, what if only he had just taken the other route to work? Right. Now, that doesn't help anybody because he didn't,
Right. Yeah. So not crap to do about it.
There's nothing to do about that, but you just have that thought of what if. There's also a thought of, now this one's a little far-fetched, but we were driving by a house that we almost bought like a decade ago.
Oh yeah.
And I had the thought that it just passed right through my mind. And it was just like, if we had lived there would have been no reason to get on the interstate. Granted, life would have been totally different anyway. Right. So he might not even have the job he has because of just reasons. It would have the butterfly effect of decisions. But that thought
it still comes through. It still
comes through of, if we lived here, there would have been no reason to get on the interstate and he would still be with us.
Right. Yeah.
Just completely irrational bargaining tactics that aren't going to get you anywhere because there's nothing to be bargained.
Right. Yeah.
So that's bargaining. Depression, self-explanatory. Self-explanatory in that it happens, not self-explanatory in its manifestation. No. As anybody who knows depression, you can put a loose definition on it and be probably close to accurate, but exactly how it manifests is
it's different in every person.
And then acceptance is the last step, the 5th step here. And that's not where it doesn't bother you. That's where you have learned to cope effectively, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's like we talked about with the parents, could easily be a lifelong grieving process.
Right.
And that process inevitably will probably end with acceptance, but it's an acceptance with sadness. It's an acceptance with...
Right. It's an acceptance, but it's not the end.
Mm.
The 5th doesn't sort of signify the end of the grieving process. Just because perhaps that's what happened with me. I don't know. Maybe just the way that my psychological makeup is built, I just fast track to the acceptance. But some people don't get to that. Some people don't get to the acceptance,
Right.
unfortunately, which
No,
it's
and
just a product of how some people's minds are constructed. Some people's brains are built, but some people just stay on one of those.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's the depression, and it's never accepted.
No, and it's a terrible situation whenever you can't pull yourself out of your grieving process or your depression in general.
Right.
It is a terrible sight because you can't. There's medication that can help. I think we mentioned that a little bit with the. I mentioned that with the meditation. It's like, you know.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes a medical intervention is necessary, but there are remedies, and that's great. But sometimes you just can't do it on your own. You have to seek some sort of alleviation. Is that a word? Alleviation?
What does alleviate other than a medication?
To alleviate it would be to take pressure off.
So to dissipate,
dissipate the pressure of said thing.
So I don't know. Probably it might not be a word, but
alleviate.
The point is made.
I'm not about to say a wrong word, and then when we just
talked about
this.
We just talked about speech. You're right. Alleviate. What was the word you said? Alleviate?
Alleviation. Alleviate is the word, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Alleviation, I don't think is a word. It should be alleviate. You're right.
What is this? What is this? Alleviation. Hold on.
Oh, it is a word.
The act of alleviating or relieving.
Oh, you were right. Alleviation. It is. Okay.
I mean, I've never seen this website before. It might just be telling you what I want to hear, but
I think colloquially alleviate is more common, but you know, alleviation gets, I mean, I understood what you meant, you know. Some people say words that aren't words and it don't matter. You know what they're saying. But I tell you, you're probably not going to find them at Macker's.
I'm getting very mixed results on this, but we're just going to operate. I'm going to operate for the rest of my life thinking alleviament's a word.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the 5 stages of grief. I want to briefly talk about the 7 stages of grief.
Oh, is this Boobler Ross?
So this is not the Boobler Ross.
Okay.
this is actually a more recent take on the Kubler-Ross, an updated Kubler-Ross model, because the Kubler-Ross is presented a little bit cut and dry, and this is in some ways, and this is kind of in some ways combines some of them together and also adds new things. So here are the 7 stages of grief. We just talked about the 5. I really identify with this, actually.
More than the 5?
I read through this and it made a lot of sense timing wise for me. And again, there's no one size fits all for grief, but for me, timing wise, this kind of makes a lot of sense. So shock and denial is the first step here.
Sure.
Which makes sense. That kind of denial was the first step, I believe, in the Kubler-Ross.
Yeah.
So this is just adding to the initial shock factor, which I talked about the sense of panic. Pain and guilt. Again, same time frame, the physical manifestation of pain plus the feeling of guilt.
Yeah, definitely.
Very, very similar time frame. And then you get anger and bargaining. Now, I never really experienced much anger with this.
Yeah.
We I could see how it would be easy. Okay, cards on the table. So
there's a lot of scenarios where if somebody like the other driver, you could get angry at that person totally easily if you were the person that's prone to get angry.
Well, so let me disclose this, and this is okay to mention because it kind of is a call to action, honestly. The reason this accident happened was because of distracted driving. I don't know did I even tell you that? I don't know if I told you.
Yes.
That. Okay, I did tell you that.
Well, I don't know. I knew, but I don't know if it was from you or not.
Yeah. So I think a product of his being on the spectrum, honestly, part of that for him was easily distracted.
Mm-hmm.
And he, from what we have gathered, was on his phone. Now, and we kind of can infer that anyway, because he hit the other vehicle going 70.
Okay, so
There
it's
was-
like they didn't notice beforehand.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's no question that
Probably, yeah.
there's no question that he was distracted in some way, and they did find the phone, and it was in a position that it had to have been being used. So there's no question about it. So moral of the story is not to out that, not that it's a big controversy.
Right.
You know, I get
It unfortunately happens a lot.
like I said that. Well, and that's what I was just about to say. Like I said, the call to action with that is don't
Get off your freaking
just
phone.
get off your phone. I think everybody does it in a lot of ways. I think everybody looks or checks things, and myself included. It's just easier not to. Seeing the effect of this now really puts it into perspective. I'm going to continue to fail on this front. I think anybody would. I'm going to continue to be distracted at times. But it really reframes the mindset of maybe it can wait. Maybe I can just not do the thing, check the thing or click the button or whatever.
Yeah, you start to think like what are the downsides of me just waiting?
Yeah. Or
And
pull over or something.
or
if
yeah.
it's urgent. I mean,
Right, yeah.
So there's that. So the call to action is be safer while driving to anybody who has those issues. But anyway, the reason I brought it up at all was on the topic of anger. It could be so easy to be angry about his distracted driving in this situation.
Oh yeah, okay.
It could be very easy. Now, myself and the family, to my knowledge, we're not going that route. We said early on, because we knew early on that it was distracted driving, day of. We said early on, this is not going to be anger, because there's no point. There's no point in anger.
Where does that get you?
That gets you arguably in a worse spot. Because now
probably,
you're going to have guilt that you got to work through later for being angry at somebody who just passed away.
Right. Yeah.
You got, so let's just that's kind of what was said. We're just not going to do that.
Right. You're angry at nothing.
We're going to get over that now and go on to the rest of the grieving process. So, anyway, anger and bargaining was the step. So the anger, as I mentioned, bargaining, what if something had happened differently? Depression, period of isolation, loneliness, the feeling that it's inescapable, dread.
That's 4?
That's number 4.
Okay.
4 of 7. Now we enter into a departure from the Kubler-Ross. This section is called the upward turn. This is where we start to climb out of a hole, right? So I'll even read what it says here. I'm on Healthline, by the way. At this point, the stages of grief, like anger and pain, have died down, and you're left in a more calm and relaxed state. Relaxed on the situation. You understand that it happened. You know there's nothing you can do about it. You're not healed of this, but you know you don't need to be upset at the moment. This is not acceptance, but it is a calmer state.
Sort of, there's brighter days ahead type of thing.
In a lot of ways, or at the very least, just the bad feelings are suppressed at this point. Not necessarily light at the end of the tunnel, but suppressed. So that's the upward turn. That's the 5th of 7. The next one here is reconstruction and working through. So that's pretty self-explanatory. You begin to put the pieces of your life back together and move forward, and begin to move forward.
Sure.
And the next one is acceptance and hope. So hope is a little out of place here.
Yeah. In this context,
the context that hope would really work well in is in the idea of a breakup.
Oh,
so
yeah,
you accept,
totally.
because and I meant to mention this, and I'll mention it now. Grief doesn't necessitate death. Grief can be you are breaking up. Grief can be you lost your job, or you didn't get a job that you really wanted, or something like that. It depends on the level of the individual emotional state of a person for how deep into a grief state based on what kind of action,
Right.
if that makes sense. But anything really can produce a sense of grief. So in the case of, let's say, a breakup, acceptance that, actually they have an example specifically for a breakup or divorce. Acceptance and hope would be, I have a lot to offer another person. I just have to meet them.
Sure.
So it's acceptance that it's over and hope that there is a even better situation ahead of you.
Right.
So that is the 7 stages of grief. Personally, I very much identify.
Yeah,
with
I
that.
liked that. Really, I mean, we did say grief is not a science, but you could sort of say that is, in fact, science by the analysis of grief and sort of compartmentalizing it in that way. But yeah, I totally, I vibe with that 7-stage deal. It really encompasses what someone would go through in most grief scenarios pretty well.
On the subject of coping, so also cards on the table, this section is part of the reason why I didn't think I was going to talk about this at all. I want to have a brief conversation about how religion plays a role in grief and as a coping mechanism. And the reason that I didn't necessarily want to talk about this at all was, one, because if I talk about this process, I feel like I have to mention this. And if I mention this, it felt very rude. Or what am I looking for here? What's the word I'm looking for?
It can feel sort of, rude's not the right word, but the idea of people like you and I thinking that the coping mechanism and tool set that something like religion brings is simply a hoax.
Yeah.
Rude is not the right. It feels dismissive.
That's a better word. It felt dismissive to a religious person's grieving process to, I wanted to say attack, but that's not what we're going to do. To claim that their function of grief, their mechanism of grief is not founded in reality.
Right.
Therefore, in a way, in the process, stripping them of their grief. Or
at least stripping them of the tool set that allows them to get through it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which, when you're me, in a situation with your parents and your close family, is a very delicate process and a very, very, very difficult subject, because these are the last people I want to set back in the grieving process.
Sure.
That is not by function. But I think it's a good thing to talk about anyway, because honestly, it's just interesting. So pretty much everybody in my family is religious. There are some exceptions. And I will say that those people during a topic of faith were quiet, and myself included. Just whenever the idea of faith relating to the grieving process was brought up, we remained silent, because this is what you do in this moment.
That would not the time to speak up.
Yeah.
Not
so what I've been hearing a lot, especially that first week, a lot of conversations about God's plan, which is
that's a tough one.
That is a difficult thing to think about in a moment where somebody so young, 29, by the way, I didn't mention that before, somebody so young had passed away. And we want to talk about God's plan. Now, there was no consensus, because even a Christian will admit that God works in mysterious ways.
Right.
But they say something to the effect of, there has to be a reason. Because think about the mind of a Christian. There can't not be a reason. God is omnipotent. He's omniscient. He is everything that God is.
Yeah.
There can't be, what are you going to say, that this accident was the work of Satan?
Right.
I mean, you could maybe say that, but I don't think most Christians kind of go down that line of thought.
Right.
This is a God's plan. This is
because, well, I guess plug for a couple episodes from now, episode 65 is going to be a religious debate of sorts. And this sort of God's plan is talked about at length, and the actions of the world, if something can happen outside of God's plan, or if God's plan is simply a straight line that cannot be diverted from. And this is talked about at quite length. And
right.
The general consensus of Christians is simply there is nothing that can happen outside of God's plan.
Right.
Including tragedies like this one.
Right. So we have in this situation parents of now a deceased child who are looking for meaning in God's divine plan. And I just got to say, you're not going to find one. I don't think. I don't know. I'm not a pastor. I don't know anything about that.
In the famous words of Bertrand Russell, he said something along the lines of, you just can't watch a child die and believe that there is an all-loving God. You just can't do it.
Right. So there's that aspect, the looking to God's plan. And as somebody who necessarily doesn't subscribe to a higher authority, that's an interesting thing to hear, because I don't have those. I know of them, I had them, but I don't currently possess the deep-rooted acknowledgement of a divine plan. And so to hear that this must be in line with that and be accepted, the family accepts that this is a part of that plan, is a very interesting thing. And I heard specifically one person say this, and then it was agreed upon by all Christians in the room, which this boggled my mind. And I don't mean that in a making fun of them sort of way. It's just, how do you say that at a time like this? And this is what they said. So in light of this having to be a part of God's plan, they said this: if somebody doesn't have faith, how do they get through this? How can somebody without faith get through this process? Because it is the only way. I'm being them in this situation. It is the only way that I can get through this, is my faith.
Not only is that just so parochial, but that is just so dismissive and demeaning of people who aren't like them, people who aren't Christians.
Yep. And they say things.
Wow, that's wild.
And they say things, and they when I say they, I don't mean ambiguous. Somebody has maybe at some point. I mean, they said in the moment, how could an atheist get through a tragedy like this, knowing that there's nothing beyond life, knowing or thinking that they wouldn't say knowing, thinking that there is just nothing and there is no meaning. I just reminded me. They went as far as to say, again, I'm not making fun of these people, but as an interesting thing that was said, what was spoken, they went as far as to say, I've lost it. I was about to say something really important here. What did they say?
It was, you were on the entrails of...
In my defense, I only just remembered it.
It came and went.
It came and went.
It was on the entrails of how could an atheist ever get through this? Because faith is the only way I can get through this. Was it at all related to that?
It was
The way, well, try to keep thinking of that because you really built it up and I want to hear it now. But what came to mind when you said, how could an atheist get through this when they believe that there is nothing after death? There is no continuation. There is no afterlife. And I just thought, is that not just so much better than an infinite torture chamber of hell? Is not that's just not so much better than that?
But also infinite.
But
joy.
Also the opposite of that.
Right.
True.
So I kind of remember
that's the good part of that toolbox, is they can believe that someone that passes truly does pass from one life into an infinitely better next. And I will say, and I have said this in times past, they don't act like they believe that's what's happening.
Right.
But it is simply a wrench in the toolbox that allows them to sort of twist that problem.
Right.
And it works. It works for a lot of people.
So I in a way, I think, remember what I was going to say. So they went as far as to say, how could an atheist get through this when their belief system means this has no meaning? Which
that is a misunderstanding of
my
atheism.
Thought process when I heard that, again, didn't speak it. I'm not going to speak it to their face. I mean, if they find this and they hear this, sorry, but this is a space where I'm going to speak honestly and openly, but in that moment I'm not going to. But my thought when I heard that was, how could you get through this in a belief system where this does have meaning? And meaning in that your God needs this tragedy to occur for his plan? You know, and you could say, well, he's bringing his child home. You could say that. He's bringing his child home to his kingdom. And I will say this, my brother was a Christian. So this entire process was framed around a believer's death. So there was, when speaking at the funeral, the speakers that came up, there was very much an atmosphere of, he's gone home. He's with us today, or something along those lines. He is rejoicing in the kingdom of God. There was a funny moment where one of the pastors was like, what do you think he would say when he gets to heaven? My thought was, how the hell should I know? What the fuck? I'm not there and don't believe in that. So I don't.
Huh. Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways we could talk about this, but I kind of wanted to frame it as, and we kind of, in a lot of ways, did it already, but religious versus non-religious coping. The search of meaning. I think that's the thing that I really latched onto. Everything has to have a meaning. And you see this with Christians. You see this. It doesn't matter what it is. It does not matter what the occurrence is. Nothing happens without meaning.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you're walking on the side of the road and a stray cat comes up to you and follows you home. God wants me to have this cat. That's why they did this. Or it doesn't matter, you know, anything could happen. Yeah. And it's a part of God's plan because it has meaning. And yet something so tragic is a part of that meaning. Now, on the flip side of this, you take atheists. And what atheists believe? Well, as flesh bags, we do things and things happen because we are vulnerable meat sacks. And so if, again, in this situation, to use this as an example, if you are going 70 miles an hour down the road and you take your eyes off the road and hit another vehicle, good chance you're not going to walk away from that.
That is simply the way we would look at that is simply a consequence of bad choices.
Yeah.
It's all it is.
Do you have any thoughts on this whole religion versus non-religion coping and grief process?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts. Like I said earlier, the religious, and I really want to hammer this into the bedrock here. There is no making fun. Like, we laugh, but it's not coming from a place of making fun of religion.
Right.
And we can absolutely identify the value of being religious in a situation like this. And
as a tool set, holy Christ.
Like I said, the belief, the ability to be able to tell yourself that this person is now living a life so joyful that we don't even have the ability to conceive of it is a very comforting thing to tell yourself. Yeah. It works. Now, like I said, that is not where my mind goes. My mind goes to, okay, but guess what? There's an even bigger majority that are going to go to an infinitely bad spot, so bad we can't conceive of it. That's just a consequence of how I think. But like I said, there is nothing that the atheist can really pull out of their toolbox that's going to compare to that sort of cope.
For an atheist, at least for me, death is in this. Well, okay, let me preface again with this situation and in the way that it occurred. Death is an unfortunate side effect of our mortal coil, I suppose.
Right. It's an unfortunate aspect of reality.
And in this situation, being that it was avoidable makes it all worse. Because I think it's easy, right? It's easy to say, again, I was talking about the justification of death and how you can make it okay for yourself. You know, they were old and old people die. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
They were in a bad mental spot, you know, like as in cognitive decline, and their quality of life was greatly degraded, and maybe we're at the point where non-existence is better for them than existence. But that is an unfortunate reality, but that happens.
Right.
And in those situations, both somebody being very, very elderly and or that situation, you say to yourself, this makes sense. I can wrap my head around this. I can accept this and I can move on. But in the situation of a young, avoidable death, it becomes very difficult to take away any positivity. And that transitions actually beautifully into my next point here, is finding meaning.
Yeah, that's
how do you find meaning? Now we just talked about how a religious person finds meaning. Their meaning is God's plan. Their comfort is the promise of eternal joy. How does somebody else, even religious people, honestly, I'll open it up to them. I mean, there's still sadness in the moment, and
Sure.
maybe you need comfort or a sense of meaning beyond religious beyond the religious. And that's what I want to move into now is how do you find meaning as from a non-religious aspect? And I'll give you my example. So I mentioned before that in times past with a lot of people, but I'll use myself only as an example. My brother was difficult to speak to. He had social deficiencies that made it difficult to hold a conversation or want to hold a conversation. The meaning in loss to me implies growth. And for me, the growth is listen better. Be more patient. Allow somebody who struggles. What is this? What do I want to say here? Be the supporting ear to somebody who struggles.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so easy to dismiss.
Sure.
Does that mean you throw away your boundaries? Of course not. But it's not that difficult. I'm thinking back to him when he was alive. It's not that difficult to give him 10, 15 minutes of my time.
Right.
It's just not that difficult. So that is one way to find meaning, is find your growth. Another way to, this isn't necessarily finding meaning, but it is a way to, I don't want to say this, not makes sense either. It's a way to more effectively move past while honoring the loss. And that is, and this is what's been happening, finding a way to keep remembrance.
Yeah.
For me, so this comes in a lot of ways. My sister's getting married, actually, as of recording in a couple of days, this Saturday. And of course, he was going to be at the wedding. Oh, side tangent. I forgot about this. He picked out his suit for the wedding, and he got to be buried in it.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that worked out.
He picked it out. He loved it. He was so happy with the way it turned out. And then he passed, and we called the guy, a local suit retailer guy, and we just like, hey, he passed. Is there any way we can bump up his tailoring?
Yeah,
because he had already gotten all the measurements. And good old Jeff down at the suit store, Jeff was just like, oh yeah, for sure, absolutely. And that's what happened. So he was buried in the suit he was going to attend the wedding in.
Right. Well, I mean, shoot, unfortunate
that's
use case for it, but
and I said this, and this is true. I wholeheartedly think this. That couldn't have been better. Because how many people, not that, again, the loss is I would rather not happen at all. But how many people can you say, for a fact, were buried in a piece of clothing that they loved?
probably not very many. Not only loved, but picked out.
Picked out recently. How many people can you say can do that? Not many. Right. So I said that to my parents. I was just like, I know this is sad time and we're all sad and unfortunate that it had to be used in this application. But how wonderful is that? This is the silver lining. How wonderful is that? On the subject of that. So anyway, so that's side tangent about the wedding. That's why I brought up the wedding in the suit, and it was tangential to the wedding. So honoring the loss, he had a spot at the wedding. He had a seat assigned. Mm-hmm. They're going to put a photo, and they're going to reserve the seat essentially.
Right.
So you honor the loss that way. He was integral to the 4th of July celebration. He loved it. He was and the kids in the family loved it. And he was big on helping with the fireworks, getting the show together, and being the person that facilitated allowing the kids to be a part of the fireworks celebration. So the 4th of July celebration is going to be in his honor, as an example. He was big into Dungeons and Dragons, D&D. He was. And we are now planning a memorial game of Dungeons and Dragons. I've never even played. I'm gonna have to.
No better time.
I'm gonna have to learn how to play, and I love it. Actually, on the subject of remembering a loss and finding a way to not only just remember, but to participate in their hobby and to participate in the person that they were. His dad, not a video gamer, doesn't play. Like, he might play a game on his phone or on his tablet or something.
Yeah.
But he's asked me recently, because my brother was also a big into video games. He asked me, he said, "Can you go downstairs with me one of these days and help me get set up on the PlayStation? I want to play through a game, Helldivers 2." You probably have seen Helldivers.
Man. Yeah, absolutely.
My brother had 600 hours,
Oh
I
my
think,
God.
in Helldivers 2. And so his dad came to me and said, "I want to play that game." Wonderful. I said that's great. I love that for him. So I think
That's cool.
so part of finding meaning and growing from loss is knowing how you can do better and remembering the one you lost in meaningful ways. I think I would even go as far as to say it's good to just remember, but if you can do something, if you can partake in something that meant something to them.
Yeah.
Because not only is that remembrance, but in a way that's growth, because you're now doing something new.
Right.
I guess that's really all I have to say on that.
That's good. That's sort of remembering and acting out the person that they were when they were alive can definitely inspire growth in yourself.
Mm.
It helps pull the good out of the bad, for sure.
So last little bit before we wrap up, we're well up on time here. But we will end on this note. How to support somebody who's grieving. This is an interesting thing, because this is not an answer. Not that I'm an expert by any means. It just happens to be recent and top of mind. This is something that I would not know how to do if haven't gone through this situation recently. So you and I are both logically minded people.
Mm-hmm.
Something, we might possess the ability to stop ourselves from saying something like this. But let me give you an example of what not to say, and something that and something that you and I might say if we didn't have our, thinking caps on and just think through that that's a terrible thing to say. In the midst of something like this, to say something like, "There's nothing you can do about it now."
Yeah, I can immediately identify as that being a horrible thing to say.
It's true.
It's about as true as it gets.
But how unhelpful is that?
Right. And especially if you say that in their moment of, what was it, number 3 or something, of running through other scenarios, what could have been
bargaining,
right? And someone just coming up in you and saying, "Well, nothing to be done about it now."
Yeah,
it's like, shut up, dude. Just yeah, that's not good.
Now, and the next thing I want to bring up, as far as things not to say, could be construed as a really helpful thing to say potentially. And it's something like, "Time heals all wounds." Right? Something common people say.
Right, yeah.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that you had to realize. Somebody who's in the midst of grieving doesn't want to hear that. At least I wouldn't. Maybe some people do. Because here's the thing. Especially let's take specifically the context of death. You just lost somebody integral to your life, a huge part of your life, somebody you care deeply about. And somebody comes up to you and says, let me paraphrase. Let me say how this. Let me say it in a way of how it could be interpreted. You just lost somebody, and somebody comes up and says, Give it enough time and you won't care.
Not only is that not helpful to say, but that's a bad way to say it.
Yeah. Nobody would say it like that. But if you say something like time heals all, to the right ears, maybe that's helpful. But I think to a lot of people, and I think myself included, that's not what you want.
No.
You don't want to know that eventually this feeling is gonna go away. Because the feeling that you have is a result of the loss. And it's just like, oh, you'll get over it. That's not helpful. And the other, we kind of talked about it already, but the idea of, I said grieving is, there's no right way to grieve. Some people think there is. Some people genuinely think there is a pattern, a direct action, or a series of events that need to take place. And
sorry to cut you off, but I think a lot of those people are people that think you need faith.
There's a good chance. There's a good chance that that's probably true. So, no, there isn't a right way to grieve. Time may heal all wounds, but first of all, maybe it won't. And second of all, it's okay to feel. It's okay to grieve, and you can take as long as you need. This is not a rush process. What was the first point I made? I said something else.
Before time heals all wounds?
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
I freaking did. I know I did.
I don't know what it was, but
oh, nothing you can do about it.
Oh yeah.
Don't say that. That's just don't say that. So what do you say? Let me tell you what people did say. And I find this completely acceptable. In this particular situation, absolutely. So we lost somebody young, unexpected, and avoidable. Those are about all three bad metrics you can hit. What people would say is they'd come up and they would say, I don't even know what to say. That's fair.
You don't got to say anything.
You don't got to say anything. And that is what you say. It not that you say that, but you don't need to say anything. What you need, if you want to help a grieving person, support somebody who's grieving, you be present and you take responsibilities off of people who otherwise can't function. Mm-hmm. That is the best way to do this. Be present and don't try to fix the grief. Most of the things you'll say, if you try to, because that's the thing, it's fundamentally flawed. If you're saying something to somebody with the intention of making them feel better, you're trying to fix the situation. Saying anything, almost anything, is counterproductive. Which is ironic because most people want to fix it.
It's just an urge. You feel like, especially when it's someone that you care about, you sort of feel their pain in a way, and as if it was your own, and you want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But there's no way to fast track it. It's not a problem that needs solving. It doesn't work like that.
The thing you say is, I'm here for you. Can I help you? What can I do to help? What do you need? Those are the things that you say, in my opinion. And you be present. You don't try to fix. And there's a difference. This is the other part of this. There's a big difference between long-term and short-term support in this situation. Short-term is pretty obvious. You stop by, you drop off some food. A lot of people do food, and it's great. You know, that's again another thing, taking tasks away from somebody who otherwise can't. A lot of people don't eat when they're grieving.
Right.
Get food in front of them because people got to eat.
Make it as easy as possible for them to eat.
We had too much food. That's the thing. We had too much food. which
Good
granted-
problem to have.
Granted, sad that some of it had to go to waste, but great that people are not focusing on making food.
Right.
People are focusing on grieving. You send the food, you stop by, you give some hugs, and then you go home. That's short-term support, and that's important. For people who are not as close or not as in the picture, that's what you need. A phone call, whatever it is. If you truly want to help somebody who's grieving, to support them in that process, be a long-term supporter. And that means checking in. That means, if you can, continuing to help with those tasks that maybe can't be done. It's difficult in this situation because, like I said, he lived with them and he'd mow their yard.
Mm-hmm.
What are they going to do
about
now?
that?
What are they going to do? Who's going to get up on the roof and clean out the gutters or whatever? Like, what are you going to do?
Right.
Be somebody who supports long-term through check-ins, through help tasks. And if you're close enough, I would say talking to them about the person that they lost. Here's another little tidbit on this. I know I'm kind of sporadic with my stories here, but this is one thing that was literally said by his dad. And I had never thought about it, but it's absolutely true. Everybody's talking about stories about his son and saying how great he was, and just, one time he did this and one time he did this. And his dad kind of stopped for a little bit and was thinking about it. And he said, I don't want these stories to stop. I don't want people to stop talking about him because we're a couple months removed or something. And it hit me then. I was just like, he doesn't want the memory of his son to go away.
Mm-hmm.
That is a profound way to help. How you can breathe life, help to breathe life into an otherwise lost memory.
Yeah, totally. I think some people, often myself included, when you're talking to somebody that has had a recent loss, you get the feeling that talking about the loss will remind them of it, therefore bringing a wave of sadness that would not have otherwise come about.
Yeah.
But what needs to be understood is that they're thinking about it already. They're thinking about it every day.
Yep.
You're not going to make things worse, and in fact, you're probably going to make things better.
Yeah.
By reminding them of a good memory they had of this person.
Yeah. And that's all I got, really.
Yeah.
The call to action is, well, I already gave one,
get off your phone.
Get off your phone. And then the other one is be a long-term supporter of a grieving person.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've got one question that I heard that really made me think that we'll end it on, because this is
a big episode.
This is a big episode. But I think it really relates to this, especially losing someone so young. It is, if you knew the day you were going to die, what would you do?
If I knew the day, and I assume unavoidable.
Mm-hmm. Even if, say, buddy, you're going to die in 60 years.
Mm.
You and I, we'd live full lives by that point. But let's say someone tells you 85, you're going to die. And you just know that.
Yeah.
You know that you're going to live a full life, but does the knowledge of your own mortality affect the way you're going to live your life today?
I think it does. I think it does, because it's kind of, it's funny because the clock ticks no matter what. Doesn't matter if you know or it doesn't. And For all we know, that's true. 60 years is all we got.
Right.
And that the other part of that is it's not going to be much better or much worse, more than likely, unless we tragically die tomorrow. If we live full lives, which most people for the most part do, that's probably about right. So we could probably guesstimate and say, yeah, that's probably about right. I still think, though, on a mental level, it affects you because you feel like you need to hurry up and get the things you want to do done.
Right. That's the feeling when I heard this question, that was almost immediately the feeling that I got. Like, wow, I've only got the life I've lived up to this point 2 more times. That's all I've got. And it really invokes a feeling of urgency.
Yeah.
Of, man, I need to get things done. I need to stop pushing away the things that I want, but don't strive for. Even though this date might be a perfectly normal age to die.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was a really interesting question, and I appreciated being asked it, because it shouldn't make you feel the way that it does, but it just thinking about your own mortality, I think, is a good thing.
Well, I was just like, you can easily convert that question into a call to action.
Sure. Yeah.
So, because like you said, that might be reasonable. That might be what you've got. It's not a definite, but that might be it. So if knowing produces a sense of urgency to live your dreams, maybe that's what you should be doing anyway. Maybe you should attack life as ferociously as you would having a accurate timer going, as opposed to not.
In fact, the knowledge that the timer might have 2 weeks left, or the lack of knowledge that the timer might have 2 weeks left, or it might have, 60 years left. Not knowing what your timer is should in fact make you do that even more. It should make you put aside all the bullshit in your life and take action even more by not knowing than by knowing.
Stop procrastinating your happiness.
Right. That's good way to put it. But well, we'll wrap it up on that. I would say comment what you think, but maybe if you want to air your sorrows similar to what we have just done, in an act of it helping, because for some people talking does help, then feel free, drop a comment.
If you feel so inclined, share your grief, if that's helpful to you.
And we'll talk to you next week.
See ya.